He now will show you how we can get free individuals to crystallize out of this rather amorphous public us. And that's the subject of division 2 of Being and Time, the subject of authenticity, what the part of Heidegger which is really existentialist. So far we haven't said anything very existentialist. But in division 2, Heidegger talks about guilt and about death, which I don't have time to go into here, but guilt and death all turn out to be versions of anxiety, which we better talk about for a minute. A Dasein, according to Heidegger, any Dasein, anywhere, is always dimly aware that the way the world is ungrounded. By that I mean there's no reason why one has to do things this way. It isn't because it's rational to do things this way. It isn't because God ordered us to do things this way. It isn't because human nature requires we do them this way. Heidegger is, as an existentialist says at one point, that the essence of Dasein is its existence, meaning there is no human nature. We are what we take ourselves to be, how we interpret ourselves in our practices. But that is rather unsettling, and that's exactly his word for it. Anxiety is the experience, is the disposition that is our response to the fundamentally unsettling character of being Dasein. And the question then is, what do you do about it? Well, what you have to do about it is you can either flee it, in which case one goes back to the kind of conformity which is required just to be intelligible. I have to do what one does and talk like one talks. But you become a conformist. You try even more to shape up to the norms, to pronounce things the right way and dress the right way and everything. That's how you could flee into inauthenticity. Literally, that would mean something like disowning what it is to be Dasein. Or you can own up to what it is to be Dasein. To own up means, for Heidegger, to hold on to anxiety and not flee it. And if you do that, you will be catapulted into an entirely different way of being human. Now, what you do needn't change, because you only can do what one does, or you just be kooky and insane. So you go on doing probably the same thing you did, but how you do it changes completely. You no longer expect to get any deep, final meaning out of anything. So you don't embrace projects with the conviction that now at last this is going to make sense of your life. So, and you also don't then drop all your projects because they fail to make the ultimate meaning you're looking for. As one of my students once said, you are able to stick with things without getting stuck with them. In this authentic activity, Heidegger says, you no longer have to respond to what he calls the general situation. You can respond to what he calls the unique situation. He doesn't give any examples, but I take it to be something like this. Take his carpenter that he's always talking about with his hammer. When he puts his hammer down for lunch, he could just have his sausages and sauerkraut. But if there's beautiful flowers blooming outdoors and he's authentic, he doesn't have to do what a respectable carpenter does. He can go out and wander in the flowers. But it's important that he can do only what one does. He can't take off all his clothes and roll in the flowers. One doesn't do that. But there's a little space for authenticity, namely, doing the sort of thing that one does enables you to respond to the unique situation without concern for respectability and conformity. And that kind of life, not trying to get absolute meaning and responding to the current situation, makes you an individual, Heidegger says, makes you flexible, alive, gay, froh in German, and that is his idea of how one should live.
Put that way, you make it sound like a sort of philosophy of personal liberation. One hears this phrase, philosophy of liberation, used about a lot of political philosophies, but this is, as it were, an individual liberation philosophy, is it not?
But it's an existentialist liberation philosophy, which makes it the sort of last and strangest liberation philosophy. We don't liberate, say, our sexual drives or our repressed classes. The liberation comes from realizing that there's no deep truth to liberate, no deep meaning in Dasein. Accepting the ungrounded and unsettledness is itself liberating.